In 2015, The Economist declared New Zealand the rockstar economy of the developed world. The country topped global rankings for ease of doing business, government transparency, and lack of corruption. International media portrayed it as a paradise where prosperity and natural beauty coexisted perfectly. Today, New Zealand is experiencing its worst economic downturn in decades. In 2025, net migration fell to just 12,400 people, down from a peak of 135,000 in 2023. However, the economy contracted 0.5% in 2025. Productivity growth has flatlined at 0.3% per year, 5 times lower than the OECD average. The Economic Complexity Index ranks New Zealand 50th globally, below Thailand and Romania. The median house still costs 7 to 8 times median household income, nearly triple the OECD benchmark of 3. This is the story of how New Zealand's economic crisis unfolded. New Zealand's economy rests on a terrifyingly narrow foundation: agriculture, specifically dairy. In 2025, dairy exports generated approximately $22 billion, representing roughly 25% of all goods exports. That's 1/4 of the country's export earnings from a single commodity where New Zealand has no control over pricing. But here's the danger. 30% of all dairy exports go to China. More than 1/4 of New Zealand's primary export pillar depends entirely on the demand and political climate of a single nation. When China's economy slows, New Zealand feels it immediately. China is investing heavily in domestic dairy production to reduce import dependence, threatening New Zealand's long-term market access. Add meat exports worth $8.4 billion and forestry at $5 billion, and you have an economy terrifyingly concentrated in primary commodities. Most forestry exports are raw logs, unprocessed timber shipped to China to be turned into furniture. New Zealand does the low-value work while other countries capture high-margin manufacturing. High-tech exports account for only 13% of manufactured exports, well below the OECD average. Countries like South Korea, Germany, and Ireland have built massive technology and pharmaceutical sectors. New Zealand, still shipping milk powder and logs, competing in markets where margins are razor-thin. The vulnerability is staggering. A trade dispute with China, shifts in dietary preferences, drought, or new competitors, any could send the economy into freefall. Unlike diversified economies with natural hedges, New Zealand has no cushion and no quick path to diversification. If dairy is New Zealand's foundation, housing is its religion. Real estate services account for 11% of GDP. Add construction at 5 to 6%, and nearly 1/5 of all economic activity revolves around buying, selling, and building houses. The national median house price sits at $808,000 in late 2025, down 17.6% from the 2022 peak, but still representing 7 to 8 times median household income. For context, the OECD considers 3 times income affordable. New Zealand is more than double that. The real catastrophe is unfolding now. About 40% of home loans were taken out in 2020 to 2021 when rates were under 3%. These mortgages rolled over at 6% or higher. Monthly repayments nearly doubled overnight. A household paying $2,000 monthly suddenly faced $3,500 or more. Mortgage debts jumped significantly through 2024 to 2025. Forced property sales increased sharply. Families who stretched to enter the market during the boom are drowning in debt they can't service. Meanwhile, the wealthiest 10%, those owning multiple properties, captured enormous paper gains. Inequality exploded. The Gini coefficient rose from 0.33 in 2010 to 0.35 in 2023, one of the sharpest increases in the developed world. Home ownership rates among under 35s collapsed from 61% in 1991 to just 43% in 2025. An entire generation has accepted they'll never own property, fundamentally changing their relationship with the country and willingness to stay long-term. When a nation's wealth concentrates in unproductive assets like housing rather than businesses and innovation, capital doesn't flow to startups or R&D. Money sits trapped in real estate, generating no productivity gains. That's why New Zealand's productivity growth is nearly zero. New Zealand spends just 1.4% of GDP on research and development, a figure that should alarm anyone concerned about the country's future competitiveness. The OECD average is 2.7%, nearly double. That's not a small gap. It's a chasm that compounds year after year, creating an innovation deficit that becomes harder to close with each passing year. While other nations invest heavily in their future capabilities, New Zealand continues to underinvest at levels that virtually guarantee falling behind. When R&D spending is this low, predictable consequences follow. High-value industries don't emerge organically. Startups struggle to scale without the supporting ecosystem of research institutions and skilled workers. Companies fall behind global competitors who are investing twice as much in staying ahead of technological curves. The result shows up clearly in productivity data. Labor productivity in New Zealand grew by just 0.3% per year from 2012 to 2025. The OECD average was 1.5%, 5 times higher. This isn't a minor difference. It's the gap between prosperity and stagnation. The Economic Complexity Index confirms the problem. New Zealand ranks 50th globally, below Thailand, Romania, and the Philippines. This index measures how sophisticated and diverse a country's exports are. Countries higher on the index have built advanced manufacturing, technology, and pharmaceutical sectors. They have economic shock absorbers. When one industry slows, others compensate. New Zealand doesn't have that luxury. Perhaps the most damning evidence is the brain drain that has accelerated dramatically in recent years. Approximately 40,000 skilled New Zealand citizens left the country permanently in recent years. These aren't backpackers on their OE. They're engineers, scientists, IT professionals, and healthcare specialists, the very people New Zealand needs to build a knowledge economy. They're leaving for Australia, where wages are 26% higher on average, and career advancement opportunities are significantly better. New Zealand invests heavily in educating these people through its public education system, then watches helplessly as they leave to build careers and pay taxes elsewhere. When your brightest minds are fleeing in record numbers, how do you innovate? How do you compete? How do you build the industries of tomorrow? The 2024 to 2025 migration figures are catastrophic and represent a turning point in New Zealand's demographic story. Net migration plummeted to just 12,400 in the year ending September 2025, down from 135,000 at its 2023 peak. But the composition of those leaving has changed in ways that make the trend even more concerning. It's no longer just young people on working holidays or retirees seeking warmer climates. It's mid-career families with children, specialists in their prime productive years, and even retirees following their adult children overseas who have already established themselves abroad. Small towns across New Zealand are being hollowed out in real time. Places like Opotiki and Dargaville now face shuttered businesses, falling school enrollments, and public services stretched impossibly thin. When a town loses its working-age population, the remaining infrastructure becomes unsustainable. Schools close, businesses fail, and remaining residents face deteriorating services. The decline becomes self-reinforcing as fewer opportunities drive more people away. Wellington, the capital, has been particularly hard hit. Public sector job cuts have run into the thousands. In a city where 1 in 4 jobs is in government, the impact is devastating. Wellington property prices fell 6.8% year over year in 2024, a dramatic reversal for what was once considered a stable market. When people lose faith that the country has a future, they leave. And once the exodus starts, it becomes self-reinforcing. The best leave first, which makes the country weaker, which causes more to leave. It's a vicious cycle with no clear endpoint. New Zealand now faces multiple crises converging simultaneously. An aging population where 18% of citizens are over 65, projected to reach 21% by 2034. Pension costs will skyrocket just as the tax base shrinks from emigration and low birth rates. Fertility rates have collapsed to 1.56 children per woman, well below the replacement level of 2.1. Healthcare is buckling under pressure. An estimated 600,000 New Zealanders, roughly 12% of the population, don't have a regular GP. Emergency departments are overwhelmed, with average wait times exceeding 6 hours for non-urgent cases. Infrastructure deficit estimates range from 200 billion New Zealand dollars to $400 billion over the next decade. But government debt has already reached 43% of GDP, limiting fiscal room to maneuver. Approximately 400,000 people now rely on welfare support, the highest since the 1990s recession. The IMF projects GDP growth of just 1.4% in 2026 and 2.7% in 2027, anemic recovery numbers after 2025's contraction. Unemployment is forecast to peak at 5.4% in late 2026. These projections assume no major external shocks, which seems optimistic given global economic volatility. New Zealand is caught in a trap of its own making. It can't afford to crash the housing market without destroying household wealth and triggering a devastating recession. But it can't sustain current prices without locking out an entire generation from home ownership. It can't diversify its economy without massive R&D investment it can't afford. It can't stop the brain drain without raising wages that businesses can't pay given current productivity levels. Every option leads to pain, but the longer New Zealand waits to make hard choices, the worse the eventual outcome will be. The country that was once called the rockstar economy is now facing a reckoning decades in the making. The question isn't whether New Zealand will face a major economic correction. It's how severe the downturn will be and whether the country can successfully navigate the necessary structural reforms without tearing apart its social fabric. The lucky country has run out of luck.